All right, so kind of getting back onto the presentation because we got about 20 minutes left. I think should be more than enough time. I would like to leave time for questions. What benefit is gained for student learning by the story?
Maybe they could relate to real life situations or their own.
Okay.
Makes it more real, I think.
What is it? What do you mean by it?
Science. It's not like science is done by somebody upstairs in the top floor of the building and isolated from us or somewhere else. It maybe makes it more real for them.
And they see some of these scientists are a lot like them. They didn't succeed right away, and that they could do anything. These people had failed many times before they had success, and a lot of kids can relate to that.
Just kind of play off of that. I think when the students read books, they have this idea that there's an authority, but when they read historical examples, the scientists had to figure it out. There was no one telling them that. It was much like how they learned. They have to piece things together as well.
It adds an emotional part to it too, which will stick more. Like, from my whole DNA unit, I think the thing that my kids remembered most of all was that Rosalind Franklin didn't get credit for like the work that she did, you know, and that Watson and Crick, one of them was a jerk. Like that's what they
My students like that they did most of their discussions about science at a bar. Yeah.
The other thing that I think is true about this is that if they, like Wagner wasn't, his ideas were not perfect, but he was way ahead of his time as far as his general ideas about shifting continents. And sometimes kids think, well, if I come up with a good idea, everybody will say I'm brainy and wonderful, and you know, and they have to understand that science is kind of an institution too, and it kind of drags you back a little bit before you go forward. You know, it kind of questions you and says, and I always bring up bioethics to talk about some of the stem cell research that has been refuted and that kind of thing, so that they understand that every scientist is not scrupulous.
There's actually a couple of things that you said that I want to play off of. One was the related to stem cells, because not only do I use historical examples, I use contemporary examples as often as possible as well, and connect it to the historical examples. Because when we talk about stem cells and how our culture of our times, like in this country, we're actually, I believe, behind in stem cell research. I may not be right about that because of our government limitations than other countries are, and so our culture is affecting the science we can do, which is similar to what happened to Galileo. And so I help students make those connections as well. And then there was something else that you said. What was the first part of what you said?
That you might not have been completely right, but you had a really good idea, and they expect that, well, everybody will love me now.
Mm-hmm. And I have a problem with students, which may even be a problem for some of you right now. They don't participate in class because they're afraid of having the wrong answer.
Right.
And by talking about historical examples, I can actually talk about how wrong answers get us somewhere. They get it, you know, and more often than not, scientists are wrong. All they need is one idea that works or that fits, and then they can work with that. But they still put forward ideas. I think, you know, like with DNA, the triple helix instead of the double helix was proposed by, I believe, Pauling, and everybody's like, oh yeah, the triple helix, DNA has been discovered, because Pauling had won a Nobel Prize already at that time, and so that gets back to those cultural and personal influences on science. Now, kind of the title of the talk was Using History of Science. Did you have something you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I wanted to, and it may have been said earlier, but we learn, and the human animal learns best through stories. And so that in itself would be a good reason to do these as stories. But a cautionary addendum to that is there are people who can't tell jokes. No matter what they do, they just cannot.
Are you telling me something?
Right? You take it as you want. And then there are people who are natural storytellers. And so stories, use the print. Get your story from someplace. But if you are a good storyteller, then you can modify that to work with your style, and the presentation will be better. But why use stories? Because we learn by stories.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I found when I incorporate this history of nature or this history of science in my classroom is that when I go back and test later on, early in my teaching I didn't do this, and students' retention was low. And when I started incorporating these stories and making them interesting and funny and showing the students the scientists' foibles, especially pulling out the foibles from the scientists and how crazy they were, I could go back at the end of the year and say, bring up a scientist, and they'd be like, oh yeah, that's that scientist that studied cells, and stuff like that. And so it helps with overall retention ideas, because sometimes science is too abstract. The idea of looking at a cell when you can bring out.
Which, getting back to one of the initial slides about why history of science, gets back to that we're making more connections in the brain. And then somebody said emotion, which learning is emotional. If you can tie it to emotion, you're gonna hook them in.